We wanted to celebrate Nitro, Eric. I can't believe it's been 30 years by asking you, what were your top 5 WCW Monday Night Nitro moments? And I thought, hey, what better way to celebrate Nitro than to ask you your top 5 moments? And we want to hear from you guys right now live on YouTube. What were some of your top 5 Nitro moments? We'll start with your number 5, Eric. When Diamond Dallas Page disguised himself as La Parka. This was a major surprise. I remember losing my mind as a young fan when I saw this. He's knee deep in his feud with Randy Savage in 1997. La Parka was one of my favorite luchadors, and then all of a sudden, wait a minute, did La Parka just hit a diamond cutter? Bang! Here's the big reveal. I loved it as a fan, but why was this one in your top 5 and so special to you, Eric?
Because I think for me, now DDP will have a different perspective because, he lived it and I didn't. But for me as a producer, it was like, it wasn't the peak, certainly, of Page's success, but he was sure on his way. And I think it was the moment, in combination with a lot of other things, but it was the real pivot point for Page to go from stardom to superstardom. And it's the magnitude of how that moment catapulted DDP into the level that he ultimately became. It was an important moment, and it was so well executed. Even in the shot that Super Dave just put up, you look at that crowd. They're behind the finish. They got the diamond cutter up. They're all on their feet. And when you can create that much energy and reaction as a television producer, and I'm certain as a performer, it's a real sweet moment, man. And that was one of my favorites.
What a magical moment it was. I know it's got to be on DDP's short list too. But when we're asking you about your top 5 Monday Nitro moments, and again, we're live on YouTube. We want to hear your top 5 below. The number 4 moment that you picked was the genesis of Crow Sting. So to set the backstory, the NWO has become a thing when Hulk Hogan joins the Outsiders in July. And then we've got the August pay-per-view where the NWO is now in control of the big gold belt and they spray paint the world title. By September, well, that's the month for War Games. It's going to be WCW versus the NWO. And you guys had a quote-unquote fake Sting, Jeff Farmer, dress up in Sting's gear. And we had a cliffhanger on a Nitro that made people wonder, hey, is Sting with the NWO? And, of course, we find out at the pay-per-view, no, it was the NWO trying to pull a fast one and confuse other people in WCW. And it wasn't too long before, wait a minute, what the hell's going on? Who's that? It's Sting, but he's not colorful. He's not neon paint. It's black and white, and he's got a leather jacket, and he's sitting in the rafters. Why is the birth of Crow Sting in your top 5, Eric?
Probably for a lot of the same reasons that the DDP moment as La Parka was, because it was, and I think for me, it even goes a little bit earlier than that. I think Sting was doing an interview. He had his back to the camera, and he just dropped some kind of, he foreshadowed what was to come in a way that had people scratching their heads, right? It's like, wait a minute, what did he just, why has he got he's turning his back to us? The people were confused in a great way, right? That was the goal, is to get people going, what the hell is going on with Sting? And then obviously the Crow Sting character began, and as you just talked about, the real genesis of the character itself, because it was so phenomenal, man. I always like to go back to the beginning of anything. It's one of the reasons I talk about, the spider web of life. I'm here right now, but if you really look at the reason why I'm here, you've got to go back to this, which will take you back to that, which will definitely take you back to this. And I love kind of tracking the timeline of great moments and great ideas, because they all start somewhere. And the Sting character, the Crow character, the genesis of that character really started for me, I think, on September 16th, 1996. And it became such, to this day, something that people still talk about. And Steve Borden, is still traveling the world signing autographs as Crow Sting. So how do you not look at that moment and go, you know, that was pretty important. That was pretty cool.
It is interesting to think too, because you take a look at a guy like Hulk Hogan, who certainly had two different iconic personas. We know what we're talking about, the red and yellow and then the black and white. Well, Sting kind of had the same thing too. He had the neon colors and then he had the crow thing. But where we would see Hulk Hogan sort of post wrestling when he's just making public appearances, he could go back and forth. Some days he'd do the yellow and red, and other days he'd do the black and white. I find it interesting that Sting has not really done that. He has maintained, with the exception of that one-off at StarCast, and then when his son's dressed up to pay homage to the past and his final match in Greensboro last year, he's maintained the Crow persona the entire time. Like, I know we talk about the importance of the NWO to WCW, but the importance of the NWO to the Sting character can't be overstated, because he never went back to neon. He stuck with the Crow look the entire time. It changed his career. He may have been the biggest beneficiary of the NWO. In totality, it may have been Sting.
Man, it's an interesting perspective, and I agree with you on that. If you think about it, again, you know, stepping back, don't get mired in, yeah, but if you would have beat Hulk clean and whatever, like, take your armchair quarterback or your armchair booker hat off, just step back and look at it and think about it from a perspective of Sting was originally supposed to be the third man. He didn't get that opportunity, which in some respects was probably a disappointment for Sting, especially given where the NWO eventually landed, and it continues to exist, right? NWO is still one of the top 10 merchandise items in the WWE merchandise catalog to this freaking day. And Sting had the opportunity to be the third man, and he wasn't. But if you look at, as you was pointed out so well, who actually benefited the most as a talent? Arguably Hulk, because it was a second career for him. It was completely reborn as a character and enjoyed a tremendous amount of success as a result. But Sting, I think in many ways benefited even more than Hulk. I mean, Sting's been able to make a lot of money with that Crow Sting character for the last, what's it been now, 25 years?
Yeah.
30 years? Whatever it's been. It's a big benefit. I think it's pretty cool. And it certainly catapulted Sting. Sting was never as popular as a character in WCW as the Surfer Sting character. He was not a fraction as popular in WCW then in terms of scale, people that were watching and supporting, as he was the Crow Sting character. It was a much bigger character for him.
I just think it's so interesting that, you know, the nostalgia is there for almost every wrestling personality. But where Hogan could reach back in his bag of tricks and come back with the red and yellow or the black and white, Sting has maintained the Crow Sting. You got to think it's because it just resonated with fans in a bigger way. I had a conversation with him not too long ago, and he told me that the NWO angle really connected him with a large portion of wrestling fans who maybe were bullied at school or in youth sports or whatever. They could identify with this one guy against this band of bad guys, these rebels, these bullies, because that's what the NWO was. And Sting sort of represented the vigilante who could overcome all of that. So those people who maybe felt they were being picked on or isolated from others or what have you in their real life, maybe that character resonated more. But I definitely feel like it pulled an emotional lever with fans that the Neon Surfer Sting never did.
Yeah, the Neon Surfer Sting was cool. It was exciting. It was colorful. It brought a lot of positive energy. Woo! And all that was fun. You know, it's engaging. The audience could participate in it, right? And that's always really, really freaking important. But I think the psychology, as you laid out so well, the solid psychology behind the character reached the audience at a different level. You know, the audience theoretically, they're watching because they're living vicariously to one degree or another. They're living vicariously through these larger than life characters that they see on television. Same is true with dramatic series and probably sitcoms at some level. You relate to those characters in some unique way that makes you interested in them, right? Whether you're interested in their sense of humor or their ability to tell a story, their ability to make you feel certain things that you don't feel in the course of your normal day life. The psychology with the Sting character, he was really an anti-hero, right? He was the ultimate good guy that's now willing to pick up a frickin' baseball bat and clear a room because that room deserves to be cleared. That's like an aspirational quality, I think, that
Yes.
most people at least like to believe is deep down within them. Some people probably believe it's right on the surface, and for some people it is. But I think almost everybody wishes they could be that guy that would show up and clear that room of the bullies that deserve to be cleared out. We all want that. We all want to be the hero. Sting was that hero in a relatable way, not in a visually dynamic way.
Isn't it interesting too that the two hottest acts that WCW and the WWF had, and we'll call it 97, 98, were really doing the exact same thing. They were allowing the audience to live vicariously. With Sting, you were able to, that character was going to go take care of the bullies, and he was going to stand up for the little guy, and he wasn't going to be picked on, and he was a vigilante. And on the other channel, who didn't want to live vicariously through Stone Cold Steve Austin and flip their boss off and tell him to kiss your ass and give him a star? Everybody wants to beat their boss up. Everybody wants to beat up bullies. Like, I think it's interesting that wrestling fans in 97, if you had some angst, you could live vicariously on Nitro or USA.
And yeah, both characters, certainly Steve Austin was that blue collar everyman. He's got to show up to work and take crap from his boss or coworkers and just said, you know what? Enough of it. I'm not doing this anymore. And that's I've worked a lot of jobs in my life, a lot of construction jobs, physical jobs, landscaping, digging ditches, roofing houses, jobs where it's tough work. And you realize early on that almost every place you work, there's somebody, an immediate supervisor or somewhere up the line that just everybody's kind of like, man, I'd like to get that guy get him out behind the bar one night and just let him know how I really feel. That was Stone Cold Steve Austin, but he did it in a fun way. That was visually fun to watch and live vicariously through.
Kung Fu Stick is with us here live, and they say, Eric, who was the person who could have did the Sting gimmick? Not the Sting gimmick, but the Sting gimmick. The idea being, we've talked about this a lot with The Undertaker. If anyone other than Mark Calloway does that, I think we all agree, it doesn't come off quite as well. Maybe it would have been a 6-week or a 6-month. I don't know that it would have been a 20+ year career. But if someone else were to do this Crow character, I'm not saying Surfer Sting. If Surfer Sting just stays with Steve Borden, if we need someone else to do this vigilante angle, and he's going to don the Crow face paint and put on the black coat and sit in the rafters, is there anybody else that could have pulled it off, or did it have to be Steve Borden?
I think it had to be Steve Borden because, again, you got to go back and kind of remember at least what the general direction of the NWO and WCW was NWO is going to come in, decimate WCW, and then WCW is going to rise from the ashes and regain their position on the throne by taking out the NWO. That was the premise of the long-term story that we had for that. Obviously, it took a lot of twists and turns all the way in between, but that was the general premise. We knew initially that it had to be somebody that the wrestling fans identified most strongly with as a WCW hero. And you had a choice at that time. Arguably, Ric Flair was that guy in the minds of many. But the younger audience, the audience that we really had to kind of draft up and bring up along with us and expand, that was Sting. Your hardcore wrestling fan, your devoted traditional wrestling fan, it was Ric Flair all day long. But the younger wrestling fan, the younger part of our audience, it was definitely Sting. And given the choice between Flair and Sting, I couldn't imagine Ric Flair dressing up like the Crow with a bird on his shoulder, sitting up I certainly couldn't see Ric Flair scaling down on a rope, getting dropped in the middle of the arena. I could see Sting doing it, and it was the right choice. I don't think anybody else could have done that. I mean, physically, could somebody else have done it? Sure. A lot of guys could have done it. Could have been Crow Guerrero, I guess. But here's the reason why I think Sting worked so well. Keep in mind, Sting had been studying acting for a long time. In fact, I executive produced an independent film with Sting called The Real Reason Men Commit Crimes, I think. I was the executive producer of that. I think it aired on TBS or TNT, one or the other. But Sting was really committed to acting. He was learning, he was studying, he was training with acting coaches. And that character, you had to kind of immerse yourself in a character. You didn't have the luxury of the spoken word. There were no interviews to get that character over. There was very little physical contact for a long time in order to get that character over. There were no matches. There were no 2-minute promos, but the character had to grow and build. And I think because Sting understood how to use his body, his presence, his eyes, even though he was in full makeup, he made that character believable. I don't know that any other wrestlers on the roster at that time would have taken the same approach to that character as Steve Borden did because of his passion for acting. And I know people can say, what do you mean acting? You did all you had to do is stand there with a bird. Yeah, try doing that and getting a reaction sometime. It was more than just the outfit and the gimmick and the staging. It was more than that. It was a character that didn't talk, that did very little physically, that connected to that audience in an amazing way. And that's great acting.
We're visiting Eric's top 5 Nitro moments. As a reminder, number 5 was DDP doing his best La Parka in the middle of the Randy Savage angle. Number 4 was the creation of Crow Sting. But number 3 is one that everybody remembers. This too is 1996. This will be our second 1996. This is from late July, just a couple of weeks after Hulk Hogan has become bad guy at Bash at the Beach. I guess we'll call it the Disney Massacre, where we famously saw Rey Mysterio Jr. used as a lawn dart. But this got so real, Eric, that the actual authorities were called. This had to be a good feeling for you.
It was so exciting. And yeah, to have ambulances and cop cars and a fire truck rushing to the set because people that lived in proximity to Disney MGM Studios that was watching Nitro live on television called 911 because of what they saw happening on live television. Man, if that's not the sweet spot. I've talked before about the sweet spot. What's the sweet spot, you say, Eric? The sweet spot is when you get an audience that knows everything you're doing is scripted, but then you're able to create a scenario, a scene, a moment where they go, yeah, I know this stuff is scripted, but that's not supposed to happen. That's real. That's the sweet spot. And we just nailed that sweet spot. It was awesome.
It was unbelievable, the reaction from the fans, and all these years later. I mean, people are still saying and referencing that lawn dart scenario. We got to touch on number 2. I think a lot of people would argue this could be the number 1, but Scott Hall coming through the crowd, May 27th, 1996. I think this is your birthday. How old did you turn that day, Eric, on May 27th, 1996?
96, I would have been 41.
It's unbelievable to me to think about you at 41 years old, driving Scott Hall to the show in your Porsche. You know, you've got the former Razor Ramon. You've got this idea. Little did we know that it would become the biggest angle in the history of professional wrestling, that it would literally catapult WCW from sucking hind teat in this Monday Night War, or just in the promotional war of, I mean, the WWF had been king for so long. And with this one move, the winds of change were here. It's number 2 on your list, and well-deserved. Scott Hall's a big part of the entire success of Nitro, don't you think?
Without question. You know, in that moment, again, it's, you know, the same thing with the DDP thing, you know, with playing La Parka and, you know, kicking off the Randy Savage angle, or, you know, all of the things we've already talked about. It's like, for me personally, it's like, where did it all begin? What was the moment that changed so much because those are the moments that I put so much value in, right? They're not necessarily the most fun moments, but they're the most important ones. And I think when Scott Hall came down through the crowd, never been done before, everybody thought, oh my gosh, this must be real because I've never seen it before. Nobody does this. And if they don't normally do this, then therefore it's not supposed to happen. Therefore it's real. That was the psychology behind that scene. And to see it play out, not knowing then what we've all learned since about how big NWO would become and how it would impact the industry, really. But to go back and look at that moment now, or to relive that moment in my mind, it's pretty freaking awesome, because that was the beginning of so much. That was the beginning of Stone Cold Steve Austin. That was the beginning of the Attitude Era. That was the beginning of, you know, everything that you saw in WWE roughly a year later started occurring because of that moment when Scott Hall came down through the crowd and let everybody know that he was here to make a statement. It was awesome.
We're live right now at 83weeks.com. Hit that subscribe button, and most importantly, turn on the notifications bell. But let us know below, what's your top 5 moments in Nitro history? Yesterday was the 30-year anniversary. Eric's breaking his down. Number 5 was DDP doing his best La Parka. That was 1997. In September of 1996, the birth of Crow Sting came in at number 4 for Eric. The Disney Massacre, which led to Rey Mysterio doing his best lawn dart impersonation. That was late July 1996. That's number 3 on Eric's list. Number 2, we just heard, is the debut of Scott Hall coming down through the crowd. But Eric's number 1 top 5 moment in Nitro history is the Lex Luger debut. Why is this number 1, Eric?
Because it set the tone for Nitro, and Nitro changed. You know, people always say, oh, it's going to change the wrestling business forever. Okay, whatever. Very few things, very few moments, very few ideas, very few decisions actually change the industry. The rest of it is like participation trophies to make people feel good about themselves or each other. This moment, the launch of Nitro, and because of the impact and the buzz that Lex Luger created, absolutely catapulted Nitro right out of the gate. I talked about it earlier. We came out of the gate competitive. We didn't have to work up to trying to be competitive with WWE. We went from a distant number 2, pretty much where Tony Khan is today, and about the same relative position. We went from that to kicking his ass in less than 12 months. But that initial 12 months, we kick his ass one week, he kick ours the next. We were competitive right out of the chute. And it was because, in many respects, because of that moment that we created, that the wrestling audience told me they wanted. It was born out of research, as we've already described. It wasn't like, oh, I got this great idea, I'm so smart, I'm the most creative wrestling person in the world. No, I just listened to the freaking audience and figured out a way to do it. That way was Lex Luger. And Lex Luger, because of the situation, again, timing is everything, right? Sometimes it works for you, sometimes it works against you. Timing was on our side. The audience was telling us what they wanted. It was the key to our success. The situation with Lex Luger was so unbelievably unique in terms of the timing and the opportunity that it created. That moment to me is why it's my number 1 moment, because that moment, in my opinion, changed not only my fortunes, Lex's, everybody in WCW's, but if anybody should be thankful for that moment, it should be any stockholder in WWE, because that's the reason WWE started doing what we were doing, which is targeting that 18 to 49-year-old instead of teens and preteens, going live every week, just like we taught them to do, introducing more reality-based storylines, Stone Cold Steve Austin, and Mike Tyson, Mr. McMahon. All of that was a result of that moment with Lex Luger, in my not so humble opinion.
We're live here, and we've got a comment from Yes Have Some, who says, the first episode of Nitro was burned in my brain, and I consider it one of the best television pilots of all time, alongside The Sopranos, Lost, and Breaking Bad. I know you have a whole second act after pro wrestling where you just did television. But to hear that your first episode of Nitro, at least in this fan's opinion, is up there with the pilots for The Sopranos and Lost and Breaking Bad, that's got to make you feel good, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure. Of course, I'm a human being. I like to hear good shit. I get enough of the bad shit, so every once in a while, yeah, I'll take that all day long and be grateful for it. Thank you very much.
Well, we're going to talk about some more good shit, as you said, because I felt like, man, I could not have a more different list than you, because I don't think I could have a top 5 Nitro moments without mentioning what I'm going to squeeze into your honorable mentions list. Goldberg beating Hulk Hogan at the Georgia Dome for the big gold belt, like that felt like the high water mark for me for WCW. Like, I think this is one of those moments where, as a wrestling fan, you remember where you were when it happened. I was at my parents' timeshare at the Landmark in Panama City on Front Beach Road. And Monday Night Raw was a taped Raw where they had DX doing some regrettable cosplay as the Nation of Domination. But you had Goldberg, this unstoppable force that came out of nowhere. We didn't even know his name a year prior. And now he's beating Hulk Hogan in the Georgia Dome in front of what seemed like 100,000 fans. Of course, it wasn't, but that's on my list, Eric, and it's got to at least be an honorable mention for you, right?
Oh, of course, and arguably it could be on anybody's number one at the list, because it was a huge moment. I think we had like 40,000 people in attendance, and it was huge. And it's like it goes back to the beginning of Nitro. Part of the format, the Nitro format, that changed the wrestling industry legitimately, not as a participation trophy phrase. Arguably, this match and putting it on free TV, which was part of the strength of Nitro. I talked early on with Nitro in the format. We're going to bring matches and angles that you typically wouldn't see on real television. We're going to bring that pay-per-view quality content to weekly television. And a lot of the people, a lot of the dirt sheet writers at the time was like, oh, he's going to kill the business. This is going to be horrible. The pay-per-view business is going to die if they're putting all these big matchups on free TV. All of the geniuses who've convinced themselves and others that they understood the wrestling business because they quote unquote studied it. All of them said that it was absolutely the wrong thing to do. Well, here we are, years later, after dominating the WWE with a formula that everybody said was going to fail, to take it to the next step and put arguably, in fact, a lot of people were so critical of it. How could you possibly give this away on free TV? And I reminded everybody, because Ted Turner said we were in a television business, not in the pay-per-view business. That's why. Freaking knuckleheads. It's not hard to figure out. You just do what your boss tells you to do. Keep your job, make some money. It's how the world turns. And that's what this match was. It was absolutely pay-per-view quality in the minds of probably the majority of wrestling fans. Absolutely should have been a pay-per-view. In fact, some people say that's the beginning of the downfall of WCW. Like, what the fuck? But yeah, that was a very cool moment, and arguably number one in a lot of people's minds.
I feel like Lex Luger is perhaps criminally underrated when you think about magical moments, because you have as your number one Lex Luger's debut, switching teams. He was in the WWF doing a house show on Sunday night. On Monday night, here he is at the Mall of America challenging Hulk Hogan. But it was when he beat Hulk Hogan on Nitro 100, the first ever 3-hour Nitro from the Palace of Auburn Hills, the same building where years prior he was supposed to win the world title at SummerSlam from Yokozuna. He's unsuccessful. And I think everybody thought for sure, based on the Lex Express, well, he's definitely going to win the world title. It didn't happen for him. But it does a few years later when he does the unthinkable. He beat Hollywood Hulk Hogan. How in the world is this even possible? That is definitely on my honorable mention list. I mean, just the reaction from the crowd alone, I think it's got to be on the list of biggest pops in WCW history. But then even the backstage celebration after, where you see Rey Mysterio, Lex, and others trying to furiously scrub that NWO spray paint off the world title. This has to be on the honorable mentions list, doesn't it?
Oh, it's such a cool moment. And again, because of the way my mind works, I'm always looking to go back to the genesis of things and where it all began. To me, that's the most fascinating. Without question, in terms of a big moment, Goldberg Hogan, obviously, this right there with it for different reasons, but this moment's right there with the Hogan Goldberg matchup and Goldberg beating Hogan.
We're going to have a little fun with this last one because this is my list. I got to come up with the honorable mentions for your top 5, and we want to hear, what are your top 5 moments? The honorable mentions so far that I've brought up are Hogan beating Goldberg for the title and Luger beating Hogan for the title, but Hogan's not involved in my last one. It was Ric Flair's return to WCW television in the fall of '98. He comes out and they recreate the Horseman and announce that he's back, and it leads to a fiery confrontation with you on camera. And people who'd been reading the Observer and the Torch and calling the hotlines, they knew that there was a back and forth. It led to the iconic "Fire me, I'm already fired." I mean, just a great moment on WCW television. The reaction from the fans that night in Greenville, I mean, it was a pretty special moment. That makes my list of honorable mentions. Would this be on your list as well?
Nah. I mean, it was a cool moment. And if you're a Ric Flair fan, especially, absolutely one of his highlights. I thought it was excellent television, but I don't know if I'd put it in there with your other 2 honorable mentions. It wasn't quite that impactful, but certainly a great moment. I enjoyed it. It was fun for me. I got to go out there and work with Ric Flair. Like, if you can't have fun working with Ric Flair, you're in the wrong business. So for that aspect, I really dug it, but I don't know if it had as much impact on me as maybe it did on others.
Well, it was a fantastic moment as a fan who was keeping up with some of the behind the scenes, because I think as wrestling fans, we all want to suspend our disbelief. We want to be able to point to things and say, well, listen, I know what the show is, but now this, well, that was real. That felt real. It felt like,
well, it mostly was real.
yes.
That's the sweet part. And I guess I should be looking at this a little differently in terms of significant moments, because it was another example of the formula that made Nitro successful, which was the reality-based television. When I talk about that and I reference reality-based television, it probably means different things to different people. But for me, it's taking real-life scenarios that people are aware of, modifying them somewhat, playing with them a little bit, getting a little creative with them, and bringing those real-life issues into a scripted environment and doing so and keeping it believable. This was a great example of that. One of the challenges, I mean, anybody that knows Ric Flair knows he wears his emotions on his sleeve.
Yes.
It's not going to be hard to figure out what Ric Flair's thinking at any given minute, right? That can be challenging at times, but can also be a real gift. And in this case, from a television producer's point of view and a talent's point of view, in my case, working with Rick, same reason I used to like to work with Steve Austin, because it came so easy. Because Steve Austin could make you believe it was real. Mick Foley could make you believe it was real when he wanted to. Ric Flair could make you believe it was real. And in this scenario, with this backstory, which was very real, and because Rick did wear his emotions on his sleeve, that intensity, his seemingly portrayed hatred of me, that was not acting. That was Rick wearing his emotions on his sleeves and just letting me have it, but within the structure of a story that had a payoff. That's kind of magical. When you can get it, it's magic. It can go wrong too. It can go real shitty real fast in the right or / wrong situation. But in this case with Rick, it was pretty freaking awesome.
SaveWithConrad.com. My name is Rajiv. I'm in Sacramento, California. I came to Save with Conrad because I've heard Conrad talk about how he helps people all the time save money and the best route to go for getting some mortgages and finances done. And having heard so many different testimonials in the past, it made the most sense to go this route. We were in the market for a new house and we wanted to know what we could afford. So we spoke with Steve and then Diane to get through the pre-approval process to see what we could afford. And then once we were able to understand that aspect of it, that was when we were able to shop around for a house to get a mortgage through Save with Conrad. Everybody on the team was great. Everybody really explained everything fully to where it was more in like layman's terms to where I could understand it as someone not in the business or having shopped around for houses too many times. So being able to understand every step of the process and talking with everyone on the team about that was really, really helpful. And it made me feel really confident that I was going the right route. I would definitely recommend Save with Conrad to others. I know that sometimes people look at it and they go, oh, they're based in Alabama, what could they help me with? But I'm out here in California and they were able to square everything away and get things done really quickly, as opposed to sometimes even people out here don't move as quickly as the Save with Conrad team. So everything was really well done, really efficient, and I would definitely recommend Save with Conrad to others. My name is Rajiv. I'm in Sacramento, California, and I was able to get into my dream home with SaveWithConrad.com.
NMLS number 2129, Equal Housing Lender. SaveWithConrad.com.